An unusual hour, although it's the second time we've done it. And once again, we need to be out of this room in advance of a meeting that's going to start at 7:30. I think this time the DRB is meeting at 7:30, so by about 7:20 or so, we need to put the room back together the way they like it and get out. So we probably better start. I imagine we've got a few more folks who will be coming in. Apologies for changing up the meeting time. I can't even remember. Well, I guess the DRB was the conflict, but in any case, I, as always, appreciate you giving of your time to this project and joining us. Our plan tonight is to review, of course, Module 2, or to begin our review of Module 2. I think, from our standpoint at least, we'd like to proceed as we did with Module 1, and that being, I'll present to you our perception, the consultant staff team perception of where the big changes are as when we compare the material in this module with the existing zoning ordinance. And then we'll go around and people will identify sort of priority issues for further exploration and discussion. And we'll talk about that as time allows tonight, and then we'll talk about ways that we'll be able to continue the conversation. Those of you who attended the last meeting will remember that we spent the last meeting responding to the group's identification of priority issues, and we talked about options for things like lot line houses and building height, and we talked about how eventually at the end of this module release phase of the project that we're going to put together a consolidated review draft, and it is when we release that draft that you will see how, if at all, we've responded to the concerns and discussion that have occurred at the advisory group level. So I guess what I'm telling you is at this point is, trust me, we are listening. Trust me, you will see changes in response to some of the discussions that we have with you. I met with the PAZ council members this morning in the PAZ context, concerns that were addressed by them. But, and to the extent that changes, you do not see changes in that draft that reflect at least your personal views, we'll explain to you why we haven't made those changes, and then we'll continue on a pace. So I want you to know that your input is valued, and I know that it might be a little frustrating to kind of wonder what's happening with all that input in between the time of the initial module release and the time that we turn around a revised draft, but that will occur. It will occur in the next months and in next steps phase of tonight's presentation. I'll talk to you about the schedule for that. We seem to be right on schedule with the release of Module 2. We're now imagining that the initial draft will be released in 4 pieces, and I'll talk to you about that in a second. But this module we're calling, I think we called the first one the district framework module, because we had all the basic zoning districts, the residential, commercial, industrial type classifications. This one we're calling the overlays and standards chapter. It doesn't contain all of the kind of generally applicable standards, but some of those that are really important to the land development process in terms of parking and landscaping. So that's why we named it such. After we get through this second module, we'll have one more piece of the zoning ordinance left, what we're calling the third module, and that'll cover things like the hillside development standards, signs, the administration and procedural aspects. You know, how are rezonings processed, how are conditional uses, how are variances and appeals of administrative decision, those sorts of administrative and procedural provisions, and then a wrap-up of the definitions chapter and a few miscellaneous things. And then the fourth module will consist of the subdivision regulations. That seemed to, in the past few weeks, kind of seem to be kind of the best way to handle it. So that said, I'm going to take you on a brief tour through Module 2 and what we consider to be the big changes when you compare Module 2 to the existing ordinance. I'll start with the overlays chapter, which is chapter 2025. First thing I'll bring to your attention is a couple of new proposed overlay districts. We've talked about them in the concepts and directions phase and maybe even in recent meetings. The first one is a new pedestrian overlay district that would just exist in the text of the ordinance until such time in a later phase of the project it was applied through the rezoning process to a particular street or collection of blocks in town. But it would be a new tool to help preserve and protect areas that have a strong sort of pedestrian-oriented character, where the buildings sort of line up to the sidewalk and there's lots of doors and windows that engage the pedestrians, and parking is sort of handled as an afterthought to the rear of the lot, or somehow not plays such a prominent role in the character of that area. You could think of downtown, certain streets within the downtown as, good candidates for this. There may be areas outside of downtown that could eventually be studied and considered prime candidates for this type of district. But again, it would exist as a district only and wouldn't really be effective until such time as a rezoning were to take place that applies it on the maps. It addresses, as I says, building orientation, the location of the building on the lot, usually requiring that the building or a significant portion of the building but right up to the sidewalk or very near the sidewalk, that there be doors and windows along the ground floor that help to make it a sort of exciting and engaging place for pedestrians, and that parking and vehicle access is sort of handled as a not so prominent physical feature. The second overlay district is the neighborhood character overlay. Again, something we talked about in the Concepts and Directions report. It really exists in this draft and would exist in in an ordinance that would ultimately be adopted in a zoning ordinance as enabling legislation, simply saying that it is possible after a sort of neighborhood or small area planning process to come up with a plan and to then memorialize this plan or to make the plan effective through the adoption of an overlay district that reflects the unique characteristics of a particular part of town. And it could be a residential setting, it could be a non-residential setting, but the point I want to make is that it's truly intended to be reserved for unique situations. It would be most unfortunate, I think, if sort of every neighborhood in town had to have a district named after their neighborhood, because then we're sort of back in the special districts trap that we've found ourselves in now. But that there are instances where the existing residential or commercial districts, simply because they're written to apply sort of in multiple areas of the city, where they can't truly capture the unique characteristics of a particular area. So we thought this type of tool would be nice to include in the ordinance as at least an enabling authority. Now, those are new proposals. We've also made some proposals in this draft to eliminate some existing overlay zoning classifications. The enterprise commercial zoning classification, the sort of the big box or large-scale commercial district. I think currently the threshold is if you're doing something office, commercial, even office of 30,000 square feet or more of gross cumulative floor area, either in one building or inline retail or whatever, you've got to be rezoned into this enterprise commercial overlay classification. And we see, as you work in other jurisdictions, concern about heightened concern about what happens on sites of large commercial developments, but it's fairly unusual in our experience to see that handled as an overlay. And so we're proposing that maybe we shift our thinking and consider whether the ordinance shouldn't simply include large-scale commercial development standards or design standards that would apply if you're doing a development proposal and it hits whatever magic threshold, 30,000, 50,000, 70,000, whatever threshold, that there are some supplemental standards that apply, and many of those could be sort of extracted from the existing enterprise commercial district. Now, some people sort of feel like, well, gee, aren't we losing something by way of having it as a zoning classification? It's possible to look at it that way. I'm not sure that there's a right or wrong answer to that, but one thing that you would see as part of moving to a design standards is as a large-scale commercial use changed over time. Currently, once you zone a parcel EC commercial, that's your chance to review that project. The next one that comes down the line already has the zoning, so it doesn't have to be reviewed. If you handle it as a sort of project level set of standards, you would be able to review each successive change of commercial use in that setting. And so it might provide even greater public review of large-scale development requests. Also proposed for elimination are the two CLB districts, CLB and CLB1, the liquor, the districts you have to, the overlay districts you have to be rezoned to if you want to have liquor sales. Again, I don't remember working in a jurisdiction that has used the overlay district approach for that purpose. Doesn't mean it's a wrong approach. We just thought, again, that it may be an opportunity to bring to use development standards, use-specific standards for these types of facilities in lieu of a rezoning process. And another way to think about the downside of having it as an existing overlay process is there may be this zoning that exists in areas that isn't highly desirable and maybe one of these places wants to move. Well, the requirement to have them go through the rezoning process to get a new CLB classification in an area that may be more conducive or better in terms of impacts on neighbor is really a disincentive for them to move their establishment. So another reason, a less cumbersome way to handle these things. And finally, the gas station overlay. Again, real unusual to see a gas station I think it's called the service station or a commercial gas station overlay. We think that you'll achieve the same or better results, frankly, through simply having standards that apply to establishments that sell gasoline or have gasoline pumps. Another couple of districts that are proposed to be eliminated, primarily because they've never been used, and I'm not sure any of us really understand their purpose, and that's the park environs overlay. Never been mapped, never been used. And the same with the brand of historic overlay that is found in Chapter 1958. We have a historic overlay district. It's the Fort Missoula Historic Overlay District, but it's in no way related to the historic overlay district that exists within Chapter 1958, which is a source of great confusion. Again, it's never been used, never been mapped. The city loses nothing in terms of historic protections on historic property by eliminating that district. There's currently work afoot to craft a new historic district or new historic preservation regulations. I'm sure many of you are aware of that effort, and spearheaded by the Historic Preservation Commission and the Commission staff. And those could well ultimately end up in the zoning ordinance, but we don't see the ones in 1958 as having much value. And again, they've never been used. Couple more things about the overlay chapter. The planned unit development chapter has been revised or tinkered with more than some of the others that are existing. We have a PUD overlay in the existing ordinance. It's rather vague in terms of its overall intent and how it's intended to be used, and we tried to maybe make it a little clearer about the use of the PUD overlay. And one of the things I think we pointed out as somewhat of a criticism of the existing system is the extent to which Missoula in recent years has relied on the PUD as the way of accommodating new development. It seems like every project that comes along needs to be, for either because the applicant thinks so or because the city thinks so, has to be a PUD or a special district. And it's really created this long list of districts that you can't find the regulations for in the book. You have to search for a file somewhere in the OPG offices, and it really is creating a kind of a confusing situation. So we've said that to the extent possible, we want to avoid the need to rely on these sorts of special tools. But at the same time, we do believe that there's a role for this kind of highly specialized, highly this kind of district that can be really tailored to a very unique development project. There simply can't be a perfect ordinance that accommodates all the new things that occur in our changing world. And so there needs to be a PUD type tool available, and if we can discipline ourselves to use it only in those truly unique circumstances, I think it'll be kind of a win-win. The riparian resource overlay. This is an existing overlay district. I had initially thought that I was going to say, oh, we haven't done anything to that, but then Laval reminded me we have made a couple of suggested modifications to that district that, to date at least, are intended to clarify what you can and can't do within an area of riparian resources, I think how the ordinance refers to it. And the other reason that that change was made, and the reason that we may be suggesting as we move forward from here, additional changes to the riparian overlay section, is to sort of ensure greater consistency with the subdivision regulations. It's a bit of a disconnect between the city, what the riparian resource regulations of the city subdivision regulations say when compared to the city zoning regulations, and then the county subdivision regulations have an even more different approach that reflects, in some people's way of thinking, a more modern and better way of dealing with riparian resources. So that's just a heads up that I inadvertently didn't include a sort of editor's note that says this section has changed in that riparian resource chapter, and I should have, because it was my intent to call those out. The change occurs in the language, the substance of the change that occurs is on page, this is in chapter 2025, on the 9th page of that chapter, 2025-090D, construction prohibited. It is in that subsection that you'll find the key, that section's been kind of reworked as part of this, and may not be worth too much of our time to get into an in-depth discussion of that language tonight, because as I say, the folks in open space and projects have some additional views about ways that we could improve the riparian resource overlay, so there's likely to be some additional changes proposed down the road. Rounding out the overlay districts chapter is just a heads up that the chapter does include several existing districts that haven't been modified in any substantive way. Those include the Boulevard overlay, Southside Riverfront. I just told you riparian resource is not that way. It does have a substantive change in it, so scratch that. Fort Missoula historic overlay is carry forward whole cloth, no substantive change, and the Hillview Heights overlay is the same story. It's brought forward, no substantive changes. No, I guess that isn't it. The one other thing, the existing chapter includes the overlay districts chapter 2025, includes the Rattlesnake Valley overlay district, the text for the Rattlesnake Valley overlay district. That district has never been mapped. And as such, the regulations that are written in the book are of really no value. They're not sort of self-executing. They have to, that district would have to be applied in order for those regulations to be in effect. So I guess what I'm asking myself, and certainly looking for your comments on, and I know Jan really wants to participate in this discussion as well, so I'm sure it'll continue. But should we eliminate the text? I mean, it's kind of a, should we use it or lose it kind of proposition, because it's really creating some confusion. People who live in the Rattlesnake, perhaps, I don't know, put words in people's mouth, may look at that and go, oh, great, look at these regulations and standards that we have for our area, only to later find out that, no, they don't apply in your area because the district has never been applied to the zoning map. And I think we do have to ask ourselves, are we doing people a disservice in terms of what we're communicating to them if we have an overlay that has a neighborhood's name on it or an area of town's name on it that really isn't effective because it's not applied? That's the question before us. Moving from the overlay chapters, and I'm just about done, frankly, we've got 3 additional pieces. We've got the parking and access chapter, what we're calling the parking and access chapter. That's chapter 20.60. And, you know, much of what you'll see in that chapter is existing. We've sort of edited it for format and to integrate into our overall organizational scheme. In our estimation, there are just 3 or 4 changes that we should highlight. One is you'll see in the table of minimum parking ratios that heretofore didn't exist. And the reason we did that is because our new use classification system, we want to have a sort of one-to-one correspondence. For each of the uses that are allowed or not allowed in a given zoning district, there ought to be a parking standard. Even if the standard says none is required, you ought to know, you know, the philosophy being that we ought to be able to answer the question, what's the parking ratio that applies to this use? And those are highlighted in the new ones are highlighted in the table of minimum vehicle parking requirements that begins on page 20-60-3. The other changes you'll see in that chapter is we've attempted to add some additional flexibility when it comes to parking. Currently, the ordinance has the sort of normal flexibility, if you want to call it that, of going to the Board of Adjustment and requesting a variance, or going through some sort of alternative compliance process that's administered by I'm not sure who, and that's all well and good, but there are certain other sort of criterion instances that we thought might be good candidates for sort of an administratively approvable alternative compliance process. If my business or development happens to be near a very well-served transit corridor, should I get a break on parking, or should the minimum parking requirements be relaxed, or should I have at least the option of going to the city and making a case for that? If I'm if I'm a major employer and I have some sort of transportation demand management program where I subsidize bus passes or provide preferential parking spaces for van pools, and should I be able to make the case that I'm doing my part to sort of reduce the reliance on single-use automobiles and have the ability to request some flexibility in parking? And we think that the answer to that question is yes. You'll tell us if it seems right for Missoula, but those are the types of flexible alternative compliance criteria we've added to the ordinance that would, under this proposal, be eligible to be approved by the zoning officer. And then there would be a sort of second class, a type 2 alternative compliance process where it was more open-ended and more discretionary, and you would come forward with and make your case for why you think relief should be granted against a more open-ended set of criteria. So it's sort of a sort of administratively approvable type 1 path, and then a more open-ended public process through a type 2 alternative compliance path. You'll see. Rounding out the other changes to parking and access chapter are updated design standards for long-term bicycle parking. The ordinance, though it was pretty, I think, cutting edge in terms of its bicycle parking requirements, left a lot to the imagination in terms of how long-term bicycle parking ought to be configured and what the requirements for that are. So staff had asked that we sort of look into that, and we've added some proposed standards, and we've added proposed standards for drive-through facilities that didn't currently exist in the ordinance. Now, the landscaping chapter, which is right after the parking chapter, this landscaping is 20.65, really even fewer substantive changes than in the parking chapter. The real big idea here is that we've taken the landscaping provisions that reside in multiple locations in the ordinance, in the multi-dwelling chapter, in the townhouse chapter, in the EC overlay chapter, and in the landscaping and buffering chapter, put them all together in one place so that there aren't these sort of provisions that are sometimes working in concert and sometimes conflicting. So you could go to one location and find the answer to the question about what are the city's expectations with regard to landscaping and buffering for my development. The changes, if any, that are made in the chapter, I believe are all highlighted with an editor's note, and most, if not all, have been made in response to trying to reconcile similar, though slightly different standards that might exist in the townhouse versus the multi-dwelling versus the landscaping and buffering chapter. The last piece, we're not to next steps yet. The last piece of this module, Module 2, is the Measurements and Exceptions chapter, or at least the first part of the Measurements and Exceptions chapter. There may be other things that we need to add to it as we continue, which is the chapter that is supposed to answer questions about, okay, you've told me that my building needs to be set back X feet and that it can't exceed Y feet in height. How do I measure that, and what are the exceptions? So it attempts to consolidate all those types of standards in one place. The existing ordinance, again, kind of scatters those about. Some are in the zoning districts chapter, some are in an exceptions chapter, and some are hiding out in chapters you'd never think they could be found in. Put those all in one place. In terms of the changes, the major ones from our standpoint are we've added new rules for how to determine what the average or contextual front setback is in those rare instances. I think Missoula, it's fairly rare to find a pattern on a block face where the existing buildings were built maybe before zoning or before some kind of change was made to the ordinance, and all of the existing buildings are sort of built out closer to the sidewalk, and yet the ordinance would require for somebody coming in new that they set their building back, raising the prospect of me having to have my new house set back further from my neighbors who are all pushed out closer to the curb and sort of, creating a canyon for me. That we think in those, again, rare instances where that might occur under strict compliance, that we offer this kind of setback averaging option that says, look to two neighbors on each side and use those setbacks as the way to calculate the average, and you can build out to that so that you could be more in keeping with the context on the block. A new method for measuring building height. We spent a fair amount of time at the last meeting talking about people's initial and frankly understandable reaction to the proposed change in building height in many of the R districts. We had recommended in the district's framework module a maximum height of 35 feet, and people, I think several people took exception to that or were concerned that maybe that might not be in keeping with the established character of certain neighborhoods. And I think we sort of left that discussion saying, well, let's wait and see, because it kind of depends on how we measure height. Whether or not 30 feet or 35 or 28 or 37 is the right number depends on what we come up with in terms of a consistent way that we're going to measure building height in the future. And it's an important subject because there is some confusion, there is some controversy and some consternation, frankly, about the way you can measure building height under the zoning ordinance. There are at least a couple of different ways that it can be done, and not everybody agrees even about those options and the way they're administered and interpreted. So the new draft, as a starting point, proposes a single way that building height might be measured. And it is, I want to sort of stress, a starting point, because this is a complicated subject. In essence, the draft says that building height under this new draft ordinance is the vertical distance that exists from natural or finished grade, whichever is lower, to the highest point of the building, which is a marked departure from the way building height's measured under the existing ordinance. Most often, at least in current years, I think it's accurate to say that the top of a building, for the purposes of measuring building height on a pitched roof building, has been the midpoint between the peak of the roof and the bottom of the eave, or the ridge line and the bottom of the eave. So we measure at the midpoint. So we haven't been going to the top. It's essentially like saying, well, if you believe that height regulations are established for the purpose of sort of protecting or establishing a visual character of an area, that top part of the building doesn't exist. And so a maybe more accurate way to measure building height is to go to the top. But there would be no real intent, at least from the drafting team, if we were to do that, to penalize people who've already established a building height under a different formula, or who want to build to match the character. So that would be one of the justifications or rationales in our mind for making the adjustment from 30 to 35. Now, again, the whole discussion of height measurement is in play, and will, I suppose, continue to be in play for a matter of months. But that's the short story of where we are on the height measurement formula right now. I imagine that we may further refine it based on discussions and input that we get from you all, and as we move forward to address the hillside regulations, height measurement becomes a really critical concern. In fact, the drawing that's in the draft and is shown up here at the bottom of the screen really reflects more of a hillside context, where the average versus finished grade becomes more of an issue. So that's it. I know I've said a lot. I talked fast, probably missed some things, but that, in our estimation, is what's different in this Module 2 draft. And as I said, I think it worked fairly well for us last time. If we just kind of went around the room and you kind of helped identify for us things in here that have you scratching your head, have you very concerned, and that you certainly want to hear more about or have a follow-up discussion on, either tonight or in future settings. So let's start on this side of the room tonight.
Oh, thank you. Is that on? About the rattlesnake overlay, personally, I would like to see that be a part of the new ordinance in some capacity, and if that means we have to design a map to design the area, then I think that should be done. And I also wanted to comment on all of the landscaping information in the landscaping section. It brought to mind, I think it's really good to define this and put it in to clear information in the zoning ordinance. I never realized until I saw some of the landscaping that has been done in the last few years in various neighborhoods and boulevards and around commercial construction, how important landscaping is, and what a difference it makes in not only the way the area looks, but in the way it makes people feel when they're in those particular areas. And I think it's important that this be well defined and be a part of something that is legal and required for, especially for any new construction.
Lee?
I have another little list. When I went through here, I had some questions about it, and on the PUD, that does have a protest right. Is that not correct?
Yes, all the overlay districts as zoning districts would have to be applied in the manner of any zoning district And under Montana law, those are all protestable decisions that, once you meet the protest thresholds, it requires a two-thirds vote of the members
Right,
present
the
and
city
voting of council, yeah.
Okay. Have you looked at our scraping, part of our scraping ordinance, which protects neighborhoods from sort of egregious development where somebody comes in and scrapes off an existing house and plunks in something, like what happened on Railroad, or Alder, I should say?
Well, I have a copy of the anti-scraping ordinance, as it's called, and I have looked at it,
Okay. Because I think it's important for neighborhoods to have
Sure.
some protection. I am concerned about the zoning officer's opinions being given in various alternate compliance situations. These really deserve to be handled as variances, because it could really affect a neighborhood, residential, but also a business situation. If somebody gets a pass on parking regulations, it could put a real stress on neighboring businesses, as well as, say, boil over into residential areas where they will absorb the parking. Still, a question from the last time around was why the B&Bs allowed all over the city? That was kind of a question. That's a commercial enterprise being allowed in all of the residential areas, and I kind of like to know why. You have density transfers in here. Does that mean that you can buy land in a riparian area? Say I've got now 100 acres in a riparian area, but I can't build in the riparian area, but I have the right, because it's, even though it's not buildable, to transfer those building rights to another location and really impact that area. And this is transferable building rights I'm speaking of, and you've got density transfers, and I'd like to have a...
What section is that?
It is right
I think
after the historic.
in the rattlesnake overlay,
Yeah.
the district that is a district with no
Right.
no effect.
Yeah, but I'd like to know, because in the growth plan, it talks about transferable development rights. And they used it on what is called Murphy's Bluff, where the fellow bought much of the bluff. It wasn't buildable, so the area at the base of the bluff was very tightly densified. Because he said, I have X number of acres, therefore I can transfer those to the base. I want to have that completely clarified in the new zoning, if we could.
Are you an advocate for transferable development rights in that context?
Not really, because I think they really have a tremendous impact on where they're plunked into.
Well, the reason I ask is because there are no provisions in the proposed ordinance to allow that, and I don't anticipate adding any.
Okay.
So I'm not. If maybe we could just take it off the list, unless it's something you want to make sure we do add to the ordinance.
Not really, no.
Okay.
I think the historic district, we should work on new language to establish historic districts, and that should go into the ordinances as such, because we have some very distinctive historic districts, and I know the South Side is working very hard on theirs, and the university area may be following them closely, and there are other areas where there are really distinct historic areas which you don't want to have degraded for profit or whatever. But I think instead of just saying we won't have historic overlays, we should work to develop a good historic plan.
Well, I think isn't that work happening on a sort of parallel track?
I don't know how far it is. There have been fits and starts on that.
Yeah, well, there's a complete draft. It's been presented in a public setting, and I think they've been kind of sent back to the drawing board to refine certain aspects of that. And as I meant to indicate, to the extent that the council ultimately embraced that and it goes through the public review process, I think it could find quite a nice home in the zoning ordinance. But rather than sort of working at the same time on a parallel effort to that one, if it's all right with you all to kind of let that process play out and see if it's something that we can embrace as part of the overall effort.
But say with the historic overlay that we will consider historic overlays rather than to say we aren't going to do them.
I only meant to say that the one that's in 1958, it's our recommendation that that one go away. And I could parse that language such that we recognize the importance of historic preservation as part of the effort, but that one ain't doing it for us. And
I know at this
Okay.
time it's not, but I think we need to leave a hole there so it can be plugged in.
good enough.
And the last area, it just comes back to all the alternative compliance things, riparian, parking, landscaping, and so on. I think that creates a great deal of angst, and I can see as a developer, you'd wonder, what am I allowed to do and what am I not allowed to do, as well as the neighboring properties, be they business or residential. I think that it's far better than to have what might be viewed as a political or somehow massage system in there. It should be very clear and very succinct. Lastly, I think you do keep the Rattlesnake Valley overlay. There are a lot of people working very hard up there to try to work out something.
Thanks. Gia.
I just have one comment, looking at the parking provisions. So in lieu of complying with the maximum requirements for parking spots, looks like a developer can adopt one of these alternative compliance plans, alternative parking plans, and like shared parking and off-site parking. And I wonder why underground parking isn't more front and center, because it seems to be something that's, awfully feasible, and, it looks like that it could be suggested by the developer under the Type 2 alternative parking plans, but it'd be nice to see it more front and center, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So would the idea be that the maximum requirements wouldn't apply, for example, if for the portion of the parking spaces that were underground?
Not necessarily not apply. I think maybe they would be allowed, the developer would be allowed more parking if they put in underground parking.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I mean, if you think about maximum parking requirements, they're generally adopted for two reasons. One is they have, surface parking has such a visual impact on a project, and it creates all that paved area creates stormwater issues. Once you put the parking underground, both of those, well, largely both of those issues go away.
Right.
So maybe I could see it even be written as a sort of flat-out exemption that parking spaces located underground don't count against your maximum ratio. Going much beyond that in terms of, just to be honest, underground parking represents such the cost component is so significant that I'm leery of promising too much in terms of a more aggressive approach in terms of requiring it. I think we could do maybe more to incentivize it. I think you raise a couple of really good points there.
Okay. Otherwise, I
Good.
think it looks great.
Good. Thanks.
I have just a couple of questions and maybe comments. I do like the charts that you've put in this and with regard to parking and the setbacks, and they're very clear and easy to understand. And obviously, there's a lot of changes in this from what it was before. A question I have is compliance. One of the things that comes to my mind is you have a regulation in there, it's already on the books for college, university parking, and the requirement is 1 space per 3 students. The university is continually growing, and I'm not sure that they're keeping up with the parking requirements, and a question then comes to on-street parking. And how do you address, or how can we address, or is there something that could be written in here? I know it's another governmental entity, so it makes it difficult, but it's very unclear. The standards in there, is it or is it not being addressed? Who knows? But that's a concern. In the riparian portion of this, I do know that the county has been working on riparian setbacks and riparian requirements. Have you looked at those, and are these going to be somewhat in line with what the county is working on at this current time? Could it be something that could be unified? So it'd be
The
very
current
similar?
thinking is a resounding yes. That the discussions that we've been having between the staff and consultant team is, wouldn't it be nice if we could have a sort of consistent approach to riparian area protection, city, county, subdivision, zoning, so that we can sort of seamlessly transition between those areas.
So have you talked with the rural initiatives people?
I have, and those conversations are continuing.
Okay.
Will continue as early as tomorrow morning, I think.
Another question I have with regard to landscaping, and in the codes today, we have lighting that is included with landscaping. Should I assume that you're going to address the landscaping lighting issue during a discussion of the lighting portion of the ordinance?
I think the lighting portions of the regulations will reside in the building, outside of the zoning ordinance, as
Correct.
I've been led to understand is the case today. As originally my thinking that we would have the lighting in here, but there seems to be a sentiment that, no, it's working fine as it is, let's keep it in the building, and I'm okay with that.
Okay, and I see you did take the EC out, which the current one does have lighting requirements in EC, so that took care of that question. Another question is, on two or more buildings on a single lot, and if you look in how it is proposed, we have an alley and a street building, and there is a setback requirement from the rear of the front building and to the front of the rear building. And I'm kind of wondering, are we promoting split lots and infill by addressing this in this ordinance? It is, and that is a contentious thing. So would this be a time to deal with that?
Are you referring to the provisions on page 107-5?
105.070,
Yeah.
different configurations of placement of buildings on lots? Separation of residential buildings on same lot.
On the same lot, right, right.
Just a question,
No,
a
it's an
concern.
I'll have to, I'm kind of thinking about it. I'm going to keep my mouth shut and not try and answer it right now.
And the last thing is, with all the changes in height and in combining the different areas, are we making enough changes that this will have to go to public hearing towards the end? Are you planning a public hearing? And there are some major zoning changes in here that could impact a lot of people. And I believe that people should have a voice in this.
Lee, did you tell him to ask that question? No, there will absolutely be public hearings, and before there are public hearings, there'll be more informal public workshops where we'll be, hope to answer people's questions and concerns, but this will ultimately be the subject of public hearings, thorough notification efforts, and the like. We understand that this is important subject matter to folks, and there'll be no intent to kind of rush this through as a stealth effort.
And we have this on our timeline that we are somewhat on schedule. Do you have any schedule of public hearings in the future?
Well, let's see.
Public review of draft?
Public review draft take us through May, so I'd like to think we could be in the hearing process by the second quarter of next year.
Okay.
We're on schedule right now. You talk to me in the first quarter of next year about whether we're on schedule then, but yeah,
Okay, thank you.
you bet.
All
right, I'm going to paraphrase the list because I'm at 5 pages and I only got halfway through the parking or landscaping section. So I guess the honeymoon sort of stopped. Things were going really good before because they were clarifying them, and then basically a bunch of really poor There's a lot of items, thank you. There's a lot of items, especially in landscape and buffering, that have been changed that aren't marked as changes, and a bunch of them have gone through a lot of battles lately, and they actually just redid landscape and buffering, and it made it a little bit better, and this one's actually reverting back to the poor written one. I mean, it's not as contradictory, but basically all the poor ideas came back to the surface, and the improvements never made it in. I guess I'll start with a pedestrian overlay. The part that I find very difficult as far as when it comes to interpretation, I guess, is where I'm trying to go with some of this stuff. You've got that 60% of the building must be along the primary property line and 40% of the building must be along the secondary property line. There is nothing in there about the building not being as wide as the property. So if your building doesn't go the full width of the property, you have a interpretation problem because it doesn't address what happens at that. So does the planner, after the building is going to be designed, say, oh, no, you have to make your building 25 feet wider, and then you also have to make it, 20 more feet deep, in which case then the person has no place to put parking and can't park the building that basically the Office of Planning grants is saying they have to increase the size to meet the minimum requirements. And that's under C. So that's 20.2502C. The other one, it says it has to hold the corner. There has to be some kind of exemption in there for visibility triangles. There's a good example of a building in Bozeman that has this, where the building held the corner right to the public sidewalk, and there is not enough room to actually see past the building, so the city has got mirrors across the street, and there's mirrors on the building, and it's just a travesty because literally you can't pull out because people are coming at 25, 30 miles an hour, and you only have 8 feet of sidewalk and plus the parking lane to see, and it is not nearly enough to get by it. The one I really take, you probably know this, the design standards, which are basically, it's like Planning Book 101, and they have nothing to do with architecture, and it's just planner rules. You've got 60% transparency on the first floor facade between 4 feet and 10 feet. And then there's things in here about 40% transparency then on the secondary facade. The International Energy Code, which is adopted by the state of Montana, once you go over 25% glazing on your building facades, it gets very difficult to come up with a mechanical system and a building insulation system that you can even get passed. So you're basically legislating a building that can't be passed because the International Energy Code says you can't do this anymore. Practically, what I found...
Doesn't that standard consider the whole building rather than just the
The
ground floor?
whole building, floor at a time.
Okay.
So it's a real problem. The other issue that you get with this, it would not allow the building like the Bon Marché, or was it Macy's now? It has the display boards across its entire, well, I think most people would consider its primary street, and you would only count 50% of that glass, which is right where everyone wants it, going towards it, and the only thing it has into a showroom is going a small entrance into the perfume counter. And so it would even make it, for this ordinance. And I think that building is pretty much kind of a cornerstone, what a lot of people think in the downtown. So if you had a building like that, which I think is kind of what you want, it would not apply to this pedestrian because of the glazing requirement and where you're saying the glazing has to go. There's a thing in here as well. It says the glazing cannot be reflective and it can't be tinted. I've never seen glass that wasn't reflected. It's even noted in the landscaping that the landscaping is there to stop the glare coming off the building. So all glass is reflective. And all glass we use in Montana is tinted because we only use, for the most part, low-E glass, and low-E glass is gray tinted glass, so therefore we would have to go with clear glass and have basically pretty lousy insulated windows. You've got for parking placement, this is a shortfall from practicality in Missoula. The parking only being allowed in the back of the building and never being allowed to enter or access from the front doesn't work. Hellgate Meadows is a perfect example. Paradigm has done probably, I'm going to guess, 70% of the commercial buildings out there, and we've had to try to come up with parking layouts for an entire block to try to make them functional. And what has happened is because basically the public and your customers can't get to the front door of the building, which has to face the street, and they have to park in the back of the building. Only offices go in the whole center of the block, and the only chance you'll actually have a place for retail is on the corners, because you have to park from the alley behind the building, and that's the only place that's close enough for the customer then to walk all the way around the building, cross a secondary street to the primary entry on the front side of the building. And if you're in the middle of the block, nobody is going to get out of their car, walk all the way down the alley, come up the side street, walk halfway down the block again on the primary street so they can go into the building's primary entrance, which is required in this ordinance to be on the main street. It doesn't work. The other one is,
Does it preclude rear entries?
it says the primary entry, and I know right now we already have difficulty at Hellgate Meadows trying to convince OPG what the primary entry is, because if it appears on the site plan that people are going to enter through the parking lot entranceway, it is not the primary entrance. And therefore, the street entrance, which is shown as the primary entrance, is a secondary entrance, and it does not meet the intent of the code. So, I mean, there's an example in town that was supposed to be great, and this is the shortfalls that it's coming to, and it's, I mean, it reads just like this. It has 35% glazing allowed on the primary facades and the secondary facades, and so the latest example of that is a glass block window in a storage closet, 4 feet wide, and I think it's 62 feet tall to try to meet the glazing standards. So that's also what you're going to get, is windows into the backside of the closet, so people can appreciate whatever dunnage is done by the building. You're not allowed to have spandrel glass, which would give you the appearance of glazing, but you can't see through it. But nobody knows that until at nighttime when the lights are turned on, so I don't see why you can't do something like that or just skip the rule. Anyway, one thing that I have seen in other cities like Seattle, for this type of area to function, you should be able to allow to have plazas, dining in the front, and if you did those kinds of things, or seating areas, or nice landscaping courtyards or something, you can't have the building 5 feet from the property line or the sidewalk. You've got to have some kind of pedestrian, public-oriented space in the front. And that's, I think, a better way to state it or try to describe it, and then let the person show during permitting what they intend to prove it. But then if you're going to do parking, allow parking on the side of the building and the rear of the building, but don't allow parking on the secondary street facade. It has to be interior, so the building kind of holds the corner, and the parking is out of the way where it's not a problem for the public. And it always seems nice and friendly. You know, maybe it's one-way traffic only. It's nice small parking lots that way, but it functions well. I'll skip all the other overlay districts because they don't really matter, because they're all existing. The parking chapter, I guess that's the one I can jump to next. I guess the parking chapter is missing all the meat in the parking chapter. Everything for car sizes have been taken out, percentage of compact stalls, standard stalls, none of those things are in the parking chapter anymore. Those are things that, really need to be reviewed some way in zoning. I realize engineering wants them out of the zoning manual so that they can change them basically at will without the public review, but you've got to have, you can't take it out of the zoning and, without at least letting this group know what was required in the first place, and then have some kind of tie-in to show that, things are going to be getting better or staying the same or problems resolved or something like that. I mean, so we've got to see what's being required now with all the brand-new engineering that's going on. Let me see. There's another thing in here. It said in the parking chapter, I believe it was, residences are not allowed to access their property with their vehicle off the street. I don't think you'll find that very popular. It's done basically all over historical parts of Missoula. Though University Avenue, I will give you an exception on that one. But, I mean, I'm in the Franklin to Fort neighborhood. We have alleys, there's cars, there's garages, there's carports, all in the front. They're not creating any problem. And engineering has rules where you can't have just go driveway, 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 all the way across. They make sure that there's separation and public safety, and they approve every one of them, and you have to get their blessing on it. So that's something I would definitely take out in the parking chapter. What's the other one? Oh, there's a new thing that they've added in here. It says basically, regardless of what you do, you have to provide an accessible stall. That's not what's in right now. I believe the parking ordinance doesn't even apply if there's 6 stalls or less, which is basically going to ADA stall everybody out of business, because the first stall you put in has to be a van stall, which is 2 parking spaces wide. And if your property line is only 30 feet wide, you cannot have a business where there was always a business in the first place, because as soon as you do a remodel, it kicks in. One drawback that is in the parking ordinance, and it's in landscape and buffering as well, both ordinances kick in when there's a 10% change in parking. What's really inequitable about that, if you only have 10 stalls, which means you're a very small business, you add 1 stall, it's a 10% increase in parking, but you can be Walmart or Target that has 500-600 stalls out there. You can add 50 stalls. You have a huge market value, and you've got the money to pay for it, but basically everyone that's trying to do a small local business, and it's even businesses you can probably walk to because they'd be small, and in neighborhood areas, they're totally hindered because of when these certain rules kick in, and it's 100% or nothing. A good example, if you do any renovation or build a brand new building, brand new building is 100% accessible. If you take an existing building which may not be accessible, you have to put 20% of your budget on every one of your permits towards making it more accessible, and then you have to approve that to the building department. If you give them receipts, tally up the cost of everything, that's something that I think really needs to be added into the parking ordinance and the landscaping ordinance as a way to kind of meet halfway so that you can have an improvement every time something is renovated. A good example is a small strip mall. The tenants are in and out all the time. Some businesses are there 6 months, some businesses are there, years. The next business moves in, tries to renovate it, can't change it because the entire site would have to be brought up to landscape and buffering standards, and it doesn't comply one bit, but it's a large parcel. The landlord who owns the whole building is not going to bring the parcel up to compliance. He's going to say, you as the tenant are creating that 10% increase, you pay to bring all of my property up to compliance. So things just keep deteriorating and deteriorating and deteriorating, and they don't get better until something really big changes where they can afford to bring the whole site up, like level the building and start from new. The other thing with the parking chapter, it has to do with the square foot of the units. You've got a parking per dwelling unit, but then you had 1.5 stalls at 1,250 square feet to 999. I've done efficiency apartments bigger than 1,250 square feet. I'll just make a suggestion that it's at 1,500 square feet. It's 1.5 stalls. Nothing wrong with 2 parking spaces at 2,000 square feet. That basically says it's the size of a house. Being that I have kids that are just getting out of daycare centers, 13 or more, you're supposed to have 1 parking space per 8 enrollees, plus I believe it's 2 parking spaces for the employees. It'd be a lot better off to, instead of having a giant parking lot that was used 8 or 10 minutes in the morning and 8 or 10 minutes in the afternoon, to have some kind of provision for a pull-off, drop-off area, because when you drop your kid off, that's literally all you do, drop them off. And it shouldn't be a parking lot after that. It should be something else, or should be minimized. The flow would work a lot better if there was some kind of drop-off requirement, where maybe you would have to stack 4 cars, or cars based on, 1 space per 8. I think it would work a lot better, and we wouldn't have as large of parking lots. Right now, I really don't like the way the alternative parking works. Most things it's talking about are allowed right now under the parking ordinance. You're allowed to share parking, you're allowed off-site parking, you're allowed parking at different hours, and quite honestly, I could not figure out how exactly these alternatives would work. If I was trying to have a business, say, a good example, I got a church and I've got an auditorium next door. Churches are on Sundays, auditoriums every evening. They're allowed to share the parking stall, or the one lot. It's very difficult to figure out how exactly that's supposed to work, and when am I supposed to get that approved? Am I supposed to design everything and then bring it in for permitting and find out if it's okay? Or can I do it ahead of time? Is there some way that'll be kept track of? So that's very difficult with all the way all the alternatives are written. So things that right now are as of right, you're allowed to do all this stuff, but now it seems like it's alternative, and it's something that other than as of right. There's another thing that says you can't get to off-site parking with more than 300 feet walking distance. Well, if the city right-of-way is 90 feet across and your stall is on the other side of the street because you've got an empty lot over there, you're not going to be able to get every parking stall that's off-site within 300 feet. Something I think you just say 300 feet of the property. I've got a project right now, it's an entire city block. There's another entire city block, 1 block, not even quite 1 block away, it's across the tracks basically. There is not enough room to walk down the sidewalk and cross the street to get into this huge blighted area right now that, we could turn into parking and other businesses and share parking, because 300 feet is real short. Seattle, I know they do parking a lot farther than 500 feet, but then the developer must do something of, bus transportation, or they have to have some kind of way that they're going to get the people from their parking area to their business, and it can be a long ways away. Mm-hmm. So why can't something like that play in it? Good example, I think, there's what's the big center for the Fox Theater site? The music? But the Performing Arts Center. You're probably not going to park the amount of vehicles it would take to have a Performing Arts Center there. So why can't they have a parking lot, over by the railroad tracks or something, and when they're going to do performances, people park over there, they pick them up with a bus, they bring them to the Performance Arts Center. Now, obviously, they would have to have an agreement filed with the city, couldn't be a handshake deal, something in paper has to be on writing, but that's a lot farther than 300 feet, so I think something like that needs to be added. I can land past long-term bike parking. That, I got to say, long-term bike parking is the largest joke between all the business owners in Missoula, the contractors. I don't know anyone that intends to ever allow anyone to use the bike parking. It's a storage room, it's a basement. I suppose someone could put their bike down there. I got to say, that's the most elitist chapter in the zoning code ever. A bike is a vehicle. They should be treated just like a car. If the car has to park out in the rain, the bike can park out in the rain. If you want to put a cover over it, great. Maybe you should get an advantage if you put a cover over it. LEED has advantages. If you put in bike parking and you cover it, you get some benefit points for it. There's nothing in that in here. I had the bike pedestrian officer tell me he believes everybody in Missoula owns at least 2 bikes. So I want to see if I could take a poll. How many people in here each own 2 bikes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You own 2 bikes, not your family. Every
I
one of you
own
owns
6
2
bikes
bikes.
individually.
Okay, dude. So we're at maybe 50% of the people.
Dave, besides doing that, we need to move to other...
Okay, so I'd say get rid of
Yeah.
long-term bike parking and get rid of the requirements for the size of long-term bike parking. Other than that,
Good
I
enough. Good. Dave, I do.
I'll quit and I'll
though
pass these
they were
on.
hypercritical, I do appreciate your careful review.
Yeah.
Obviously, there wasn't time for me to respond, and frankly, on some points, I have no response other than we maybe could do a better job. Other points, I think you did misrepresent what's written in here. You may be representing how you read it, and that's fair. But I just want to make clear that my lack of a response is not an acceptance of every criticism
Right.
as valid. But there'll be an opportunity to discuss this later, and I do appreciate your close scrutiny of it.
Okay.
Is this on? There should be nothing left to say.
But there is.
No, I'll be brief. I just have a couple of things. Maybe food for thought. This riparian business and the concept of making riparian management consistent across the board, county, city, whatever. I think when you look at the assets of some of the greatest cities in our country, it has to do with the development of their river frontage. And, one of the closest examples of that might be Spokane with the Riverfront Park and some of the hotel frontage along the rivers. We have in Missoula County literally tens of thousands of miles of stream frontage that's natural riparian areas that I think is what I'm reading here with all the setbacks and don't touch it and all of that. I think Missoula could be best served by developing and enhancing its river frontage as opposed to trying to make it as wild and undisturbed as all of the other thousands of miles that exist within a stone's throw of our city. I think the development and enhancement of that riparian area through Missoula, mostly along the river, could be a great asset to our city. And I'd hate to see us tie our hands even further by applying a countywide rural-type standard to that. The setbacks, I have a concern too with the setbacks within. I know one of the goals initially here was to eliminate conflicts within the zoning, and I think if you look at a lot of the zoning densities that we have, and let's just say that you own several lots within one of these zoning districts, but choose not to develop the lots individually, but rather develop the property as a whole, that applying under one ownership without lot lines, front and rear setbacks between every single building within that ownership is very contrary to the density that zone might allow. And I think that's something that should be looked at. The building height thing, I don't know really what to think of that. I'm not an architect. It makes me a little nervous. The list of architects in this town is pretty short, and I would hope that they would all be consulted and just get an idea of what the reality would be if that's implemented. Is it okay? Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? I know, that there's some of them in this group, kind of a small group tonight, but that potentially is a pretty big deal. I guess my comfort level would go up knowing that those folks have looked at that. Another issue with setbacks that I think needs some clarification, and it's a something that's probably not unique to Missoula, but the idea of front setbacks being applied to the property line is a problem. Most of the city of Missoula was actually platted subdivisions 100 years ago when that part of town was actually in the county. The county, by state law, had no ability to take fee title to the roads. So even though in these old subdivisions, the roads were dedicated as public streets, the county did not own the streets. They owned the right-of-way, or the easement, if you will. And so technically, truly, those lot lines are the center of the street. Then, over time, we had annexation by the city of all of these subdivisions. And annexation cannot be a taking. So technically, legally, those lot lines are still at the center of the street. If you were to, and I do surveys, and most of the time we don't show them that way either. We show the right-of-way line as being the property line, but I think technically, most of the time, the center of the street is a more accurate representation. So we get into a question of where do you apply that setback line? Do you apply it at this, it'd be kind of silly in a 60-foot street to apply a 20-foot front yard to the center of the street. However, that question does come up, and I think some clarification of how that situation would be treated should be part of what we accomplish here. Private roads, another issue, kind of the same issue, but a little different situation. Not every street in Missoula is a public street. There are plenty of little private boulevards and driveways and this, that, and the other thing that are all privately maintained, privately managed. Do you have to have city public street setbacks off of those type of access routes? There's a lot of people that think not. So I think that's another thing that maybe should be looked at. The pedestrian overlay, some of the other stuff that is in here, the landscaping. I think, when I look at all of this, it seems to me that I have a question of where is this going to be applied? As we look at Missoula right now, it's probably already 80 or 90% developed. So are we talking about applying these sorts of things like the pedestrian overlay, which would be text until it's actually applied to an area? As it stands right now, there isn't any place that has that overlay. So where would we apply that overlay? Would it be on new development? Would it be on existing development? I think a lot of the heartburn that people have with some of what we're reading here would have, it maybe has more to do with when and where it might be applied, as opposed to, and maybe some explanation of how that might work would alleviate a lot of your concerns. Then the only other thing I would say is just listening to small business people trying to establish new businesses in our city, landscaping standards, parking standards, pedestrian facility. It is a difficult financial thing for any small business to start a business in our city. A lot of what we already have in our regulations is disincentive for people to come here and open a business. And, I don't know that this is the place to get something done about that or not, but, we're talking about landscaping standards and parking standards and pedestrian standards. And I don't know that any of that particular concern is being addressed, but I guarantee you if you talk to any small business person that has tried to open a business in this city, that was one of the biggest hurdles they had to overcome, is just being able to afford to do it here as opposed to doing it somewhere else. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Good.
I do a clarification for riparian. I just wanted to make a clarification on the riparian. I think a question was asked earlier about coordinating with the county, and Some of you might have been referring to the streamside setback work that the county has been doing in the past. That was through the rural initiative section. We're not taking that up and trying to impose any specific prescriptive setback numbers. All we're trying to do is to work with the riparian resource overlay, the way that it's written in our city subdivision regulations and the county subdivision regulations as they exist now, and do a better job at correlating between them and clarifying the intent. So we're not carrying or folding or incorporating or working on a specific prescriptive setback, anything relating to streamside. That's a rural initiatives project.
I guess I'll start out by thanking you. So far, your work's been a lot better than I expected. I've seen both modules come through. They've been very well structured, easy to read, and I can definitely see the professionalism involved here, so I want to thank you for that. I guess I'll try to be real brief. My comments revolve around the parking area, the proposals in the parking ordinance. I do believe the city just went through a thorough review of the whole parking ordinance and passed it about 2 years ago. The reason I remember that is I was on the planning board and we spent a lot of time on that. So I'm a little confused as to why all these proposals are coming up now. Are these something the staff and you have come together and are proposing? And if that's so, why didn't staff propose a lot of these changes back when we redid the ordinance 2 years ago? After hearing one of the other gentlemen, I think I do agree that a lot of these things are already, a lot of this shared parking, a lot of these alternative parking plans are already allowed. So why are we even proposing some of this? I'm generally opposed to giving staff authority to revise or give variances. That's just in a general sense. If the zoning ordinance is well written, then anyone who wants to vary from it should have to go through a public process to get a variance, rather than having one staff person say, oh, okay, I like you, or I think what you're saying is okay. I'd rather see it done in public if they're going to vary from it. But once again, if all this is already allowed at the staff level, then I guess it's a moot point. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
I've also have found the work really nice here, Kirk. I've read several of the papers that you've written and published nationally on form-based code, and I know you have a lot of code writing experience. And I think folks around the country are benefiting from that, and I think Missoula will also benefit from that. I'll go through a couple of little items that I've got. One is on the CLB, and just give a little history of that. Folks know about the Grizzly Casino that's at the corner of Bancroft and Southwest Higgins Avenue. And that is the reason we have a CLB overlay in Missoula, and we were talking about this today. That is a property that's zoned commercial. It's in a little commercial strip that's in that neighborhood. When that casino came in with a proposal to be placed there, that neighborhood got fairly upset, and that's why we have the CLB overlay. So in Module 1, I looked back, and taverns and those kind of uses would be permitted in commercial. And while I'm not opposed to the idea of getting rid of the CLB overlay, I think we need to really clearly address this issue of casinos in neighborhoods, because I could see us being right back with another CLB overlay in not too long if we get rid of it, because it always comes up. The rattlesnake issue with the special overlay. I understand the need and the unique setting that the rattlesnake is. There's a lot of unzoned land and pockets of land within the rattlesnake, adjacent to the city and within the area. I think that putting that map together, and it's actually referenced in the text. Look, it says reference the map at the end of this section, which never appears. And I think putting that map together will be hugely controversial. And I'm not sure that's controversy we want to bite off in this process. Because, while it's a good thing, it could bog the whole thing down, and I think we should be concerned about that. Just an observation, the Fort Missoula Historic District was recently expanded by the Historic Preservation Officer, and so I think we could update the map of that. I also like the idea of transferable development rights. I think that well-structured incentives, we can actually get more conservation and open space if we consider that in our zoning ordinance. And I think that's a good thing to look at. Historic districts are something that are going to be important for us to discuss, both in the downtown and in our historic neighborhoods. I like your neighborhood character overlay, and I'm wondering how those two might interact, so that's a question I have. How can we structure that neighborhood character overlay to really work for unique neighborhoods that, we've always said, well, let's do historic overlay, but maybe it's a neighborhood character overlay that incorporates historic elements into it. I think also, just jumping to the parking really quickly, the bike parking will be controversial. Some of the provisions for locker parking and those kind of things. I think if somebody comes in for a zoning compliance permit, for a building permit, they're required to really upgrade bike parking in places that just may not work. I think that's going to be a pretty tough thing to enforce, and would probably cause quite a bit of controversy. I like the changes that you've made to shared parking and also the TDM incentives that you've got in there, and you reference a TDM report. The existing code talks about being able to do a shared parking study or report, and I'd like to see that kind of language in the shared parking section as well. Urban Land Institute has a current new document out on shared parking, and we're learning more and getting more and more data about it. And I think it does require a unique study because it is fairly complicated. Because there's ultimately a lot of different combinations of land use that can go into play in something like that. So I like your general guidelines, but I think the option for a report would be a good thing. And then I did like the comments about underground parking. I would caveat that to be structured parking, because some very well-designed parking structures can have retail, commercial in the front, or on the upper floors we can have structured parking. I would be cautious about requiring it. I like incentives as well, but it is incredibly expensive. I think we're looking at $2,000 to $3,000 for surface parking per space right now, and somewhere on the order of $20,000 to $25,000 per space for structured parking. So incentives are good, but it can kill a project that otherwise might be good. So those are my comments.
Thank you.
Well, I will just highlight a couple of things that I noticed that are a little different, perhaps. When I came into this process, I had two things in my mind. One of them was what would happen to neighborhood plans, and I wanted them actually somehow to get embedded in zoning, because otherwise they're seen as advisory only and can be somewhat easily disregarded. So I had hope for the new neighborhood character overlay, but now listening tonight, it doesn't sound like that's really the intent. So I still have a question about that. If neighbors go through enough time and energy to actually do a plan, work with OPG, get it all in written form, take it through City Council, it needs to sit somewhere so that it actually becomes part of how we really actually enforce what's going on. So if it's not going to be here in the neighborhood character overlay, I just still have my question, where is it going to be? And quite frankly, this was advice that was given to some neighbors that I'm a part of, which was by an attorney, that if you really want your neighborhood plan to be more than just advisory, you have to get it in here. So, no, I am just saying that that is something that's particularly important to some people in town, is to have a way of really being able to say, this is in here, this is enforceable, it's not simply advisory. So, I'd like to know where that could be done, and if it's not here, somewhere else would be good. The other thing I've been very concerned about for a number of years is how we do density. I'm not offended by density, but I want us to do it well. And most of us who've done subsidized housing in Missoula have done it through PUDs, because it was the way for us to actually be creative with the use of the land. And I know you've been discouraging of PUDs. I understand, I think, why that's true. I'm not sure that I've seen yet the kind of incentives yet for the kinds of projects that we are going to do. So I still would like to see some incentivizing, actually, of certain kinds of density. One place that you do that, of course, often is in parking, and I haven't seen so much of it in the parking that you have proposed here. So it's just a question that I had last time as well. If you can show me, and then therefore people I work with, how this whole zoning approach is going to actually address the affordable housing issue, how we can do density better, how it will, work with neighborhoods as well as anything else. It's hard for me to pull it out and show it to people now. And as you say, we'll see it later. So I hope we do. Otherwise, I'll have to jump up and down and be unfriendly. So let's not do that. Let's avoid that. Some specific things about the parking. I actually am an advocate of bicycle parking. The organization that I was involved with had a long conversation with OPG about how to actually trade bicycle parking for some vehicle parking. You don't really offer that as an alternative in here, and I would suggest you go all the way to motorcycles, I believe, but you don't actually put in bicycles. So we actually had leases in one of our developments that were bicycle-only leases, and people couldn't have cars. So I would like to see that as a possibility, perhaps mentioned, that bicycles can be traded out for motor vehicles. Of course, it has to be done in a way that's, again, predictable and enforceable. I'm very much an advocate for having long-term bicycle parking, and if folks feel that small businesses can't really afford it, then we should talk seriously about how we as a community afford it. So I actually am an advocate for small business as well, so then we have to ask ourselves, where are the resources to come to do the things that we need, the amenities that we need done? And I would say bicycle parking is one of the amenities we absolutely need done. Maybe I won't spend too much more time on these things. One thing I was kind of interested in, so I'll end with this one. It's a personal one, which I'm sure many of us come with a little bit of that, is in the Boulevard overlay. I was noticing something about alterations and improvements within the right-of-way, and Linda knows this because she's my neighbor. We have these conversations because they're just putting sidewalks into our neighborhood, and we have very wide boulevard areas, and we had a long conversation about if we extended our sidewalk where it was originally drawn, it would be like 2 feet from my porch, which was not a very exciting prospect. So we proposed back that we would actually put the sidewalk at the edge of where the curb was now and extend the boulevard into the street and cut the right-of-way, if you will. I'm not sure, and that's why I was reading this carefully, I'm not sure whether I would be told that I can't do that now under this language, that I had degraded the aesthetic value of the boulevard. Some people have told me that. Other people have told me they want to do it, and now it's spreading throughout our area. We have a number of people doing it. So that's just a question sometimes that I have with this kind of language, which is if there's any alterations in the public right-of-way in any boulevard overlay district that degrades aesthetic value. So
She's not in that.
Kind of a question of how to write this so that there's a way to do it. I'm not saying that we want everything to happen, but we want a way that people can propose something, which is what we did. We did a voluntary plan. We took it to Public Works, worked with them, and it was agreed upon and done.
I wanted to make 2 quick points, and then, Linda, I want to make sure you get an opportunity, because as I say, we're going to be cutting this off in just a bit. Neighborhood character overlay. It is the tool that you're looking for, but it isn't a tool that simply allows you to fold neighborhood plans into the ordinance, because plans are plans and ordinances are ordinances. If you go through a planning process and that planning process is ultimately accepted by the city or adopted in some form, then you would move to the implementation phase where you extract the regulations and standards that will implement that plan and put those in a neighborhood character overlay that is specific to the small area in question. So it is the vehicle, but it isn't simply a matter of taking a plan that's been adopted as a plan and somehow magically transforming that into an ordinance that has teeth. There would be a process by which you turn that into regulation language. But I do think it is one of the possible tools that you're looking for. On the boulevard overlay, I want to make clear, that's an overlay district. It's a mapped zoning classification. It doesn't apply simply everywhere that we think a boulevard exists. Boulevards exist, or parkways, along most, if not all, of our residential streets. But these regulations don't affect that. It's one mapped zoning classification in town.
Right, and I don't know if it's where you actually live. It's on Brook Street, the eastern end of Brook Street. That's the only place where this applies.
I probably don't. I live fairly close to it, but, yeah.
The intent, I think, when they did it was to preserve the historic streetscape, the urban tree, the urban forest along the boulevard.
Right.
And that's why you see the specifics about no curb cuts and other things like that.
Linda, thanks for being so patient.
Well, one thing nice about being last is everybody else has expressed everything I thought I should talk about in the ordinance. But Dave touched on the first thing I came with, which in the parking for the residential, the business about not being able to put a driveway in if you have alley access, which of course, being in an old established neighborhood like we are in, we have alleys. If I were to sell one of my lots, the people then wouldn't be able to put a curb cut in, and the whole look of the neighborhood has curb cuts now, and they would have to access the alley. And the other part I liked about was, which kind of ties into this, is the averaging of the setback of the houses with established houses. If they weren't able to match the setback of the established houses, but had to go further back, and I quite truthfully don't know how far back that would be, and they could only come in off the alley, well, that means then all their party time would be in their front yard next to my windows. So they wouldn't have a backyard per se to have their patio furniture and everything because of that. So I think, I agree with Dave, that shouldn't even be. And like I say, I like the averaging of the setbacks. I live in my family home, and for, maybe 20 years now. But no, I've lived there all my life, and when I grew up, there were only 4 houses on my side of the street. There are now 7 houses, and when they moved the one in adjacent to my property, they took an average, and they actually matched my setback to their setback, and it looks good, it's great. And so I like the idea of the averaging the setbacks and not allowing someone to set back 25 or 30 feet so that, like I say, their front door is at my bedroom window or something like that. And I just wanted to touch on the fact that I think you're doing a great job on Judy's, she's around the corner from me, her very unique answer to the sidewalks. It's definitely a challenge to walk down that street because of the sidewalk. But across the street, they were able to, they had established Norwegian maples like most of us do, and that had raised the roots had raised the sidewalk up, and rather than chop those roots away so the trees would die, they were allowed to put their new sidewalk in around the tree, and I'm sure that's not unique to Missoula, but it was on my block. It was very unique, and it saved the trees, didn't ruin the look of the boulevards, and so I just think that with Judy that there's some consideration should be given to the uniqueness or whatever it's called for the boulevards, and that's all I have to say, because everybody else basically did a really good job, and you've done a very good job, and thank you.
Thank you all. It's been our practice in the past to let, oh, Brian.
Yeah, latecomer here. You're not last, I'm last. Anyhow, I haven't heard some of the comments. I may be repeating, but I'll go ahead anyway. I've been a little disappointed with the minutes of these meetings because I feel like folks are spending quite a bit of time studying these things and coming across the good comments, and I think the brevity of the minutes is not recording the good advice that's coming out of the advisory committee. Unless you've got a steel trap mind, you're probably forgetting some of these comments as you go into this week after week. I'd like to see if you can do a better job getting some of the salient comments in there so they can be referred to, and going back sometime and see whether they've really been considered or just cast aside. I got 3 areas I wanted to comment on. One is PUDs. This is a very nice write-up, very clearly written, but it seems to me that it's a pretty too flexible. It sounds like anywhere within the city, regardless of whether it's appropriate or not, someone can propose a PUD, which is this thing states. You can change the uses, you can change this no setbacks, you can change this lot sizes. There's no holds barred, basically. There's a couple of, I know that one of these PUD type developments might be the mill site over here, but that might be appropriate over there. Some people think it is, some people think it isn't, but I know it would not be appropriate in the area I live. In Grant Creek, say, for example, okay? Well, there's a couple of statements in here in the original PUD development that have not been put in your new write-up. It says the combination of land uses may be permitted, including residential types and commercial uses, if the city council finds that development, item number 2 reads, will be compatible with development otherwise permitted on land in the vicinity of the proposed development. I think that should be inserted in your PUD write-up. And the next one is, will not interfere with the enjoyment of other land in the vicinity. The other point I had on the PUD is notice that the infamous density bonus has been reinserted at 50% density bonus. Seems to me it hadn't been too many years ago, probably a couple or maybe longer now, that the density bonuses were hotly debated and ultimately taken out of the city zoning. So I find it kind of disconcerting that it's kind of slipped in here somehow again. Am I wrong on all that, John?
I don't understand.
So, and then I want to, once again, I want to talk to you about casinos. Someone across the way mentioned it, but I don't think you're quite getting the message still. So I'll say it again, maybe in a different way, but if you recall last module, I noticed in the commercial zones that they allow as a permitted use nightclubs, places that serve liquor. And as you know, under Montana law, anyone that has that sort of a license or establishes is automatically entitled to a given number of gaming machines, casinos, gambling, okay? So I asked at the time, well, I had hoped that these other CLB type techniques would be still available as a possible line of defense for areas where these things are really not, they may be in a commercial zone, but they may not be desirable at that particular location in the city. Maybe it's backing up against, right up against a new neighborhood, say, for example. And I'm not a fan of these CLBs either, because I found that they don't really have much teeth when the neighborhoods go in and try to protest a casino when this comes up, because the times that I've done that, why OPG says, well, they're in it's a commercial zone, the comprehensive plan, and so forth, and it's necessary for the convenience of the public to have these casinos, and no matter what kind of vague reasons. But I'd like to see those things taken out, but I'd like to be some technique to establish now where casinos are appropriate within the city and where they are not, even though there may be commercial zones appropriate elsewhere, okay? That's what I recommend. Because I can guarantee you that in Grant Creek, we had a major confrontation about casinos there north of the interstate, and I can come forth with 300 or 400 signed petitions against it, and that was all because the commercial zone is there, and somebody wants to put a casino in. It's not appropriate. It's right next to the neighborhoods, okay? I don't have much on the parking one. I do think there's some subtle things that have not been included, one of which is in the current code, it limits where parking can actually be on a lot. Your thing says you got to have so many parking spaces and they can park it anywhere on the lot, because it doesn't say where you can't park it, okay? It gets pretty tacky when people are parking their cars on the lawns or on the setbacks right across from their neighbors' windows and whatever. I think that point ought to be covered. That's all I got.
There was just one thing I was going to respond to, and that was with regards to the PUD. I think that's with regards to the PUD and the reference to the residential density and the ability to do up to 50% additional. That is, if you've looked at the PUD standards we have right now, we have no criteria, no guiding limitations. So you could see a PUD, it goes through a rezoning process, not like the past PNCs or past way that density bonuses were applied if certain conditions occurred. PUDs, rezoning, protest provision, in the past they never had a cap, a maximum, so you could see even more than 50% being requested, and it's about debated and, settled on for whatever it would be. The idea here, I believe, was to establish a parameter, and that was all. And provide more criteria for what is appropriate for a PUD.
You can look at it that way, of course, but this really guarantees them 50%, the way it's written now. And there may be PUDs where nothing's appropriate,
Yeah, again, I apologize, but we do need to give over the room to our DRB. I see they're waiting. Yeah, it's been our... I just want to spend 1 minute telling you about where we're going from here. Obviously, we had our planning meeting tonight. We're going to be discussing internally ways in which we can continue this discussion online. I'd like to be able to start using the newsprint. I think you use the church. I'm sorry, thanks, John. The listserv, kind of like tool, the Google Groups thing the other day, and I'd like to think maybe we could continue to use that a little more and continue these discussions. Brian, as to your comment about the summaries, please point out to us immediately by phone, email, or otherwise if you think there's inaccuracies, lack of detailed, important information in our meeting summaries. They are just summaries and not minutes, and we don't mean to misrepresent things. So please bring us to task if you see something wrong there. We see the next meeting of the advisory group as occurring in mid-November, and probably a follow-up meeting again in early December, at which we can continue this discussion. We'd like to put some of these issues to bed by sort of giving you additional information in the interim. We hope to have a public workshop on the draft concurrent with the one of the upcoming meetings, the early December meeting, where we kind of communicate to the public the status of where we're at. So that's kind of how we see things. I know Laval and we'll try and keep you up to date about progress, give you lots of heads up about upcoming meeting dates, get material out to you, and thank you very much, as always.